I will get our panelists to introduce themselves in a moment, but one thing I wanted to mention, of course, is all three of our panelists today are speaking at the Business Analysis Conference Europe, which is happening in London in just a few weeks' time. Which is, in fact, it really is just a few weeks' time, about 3 weeks' time now, on the 22nd odd of September. So I will put the link to that in the chat a little bit later on. But equally, you can just Google, if you forget the link or whatever, just Google the BA Conference Europe. It's well worth it. 3 days, 2 main days, plus a workshop day afterwards, and you can pretty much get your entire year's professional development, or a good chunk of it, in those 3 days. So please do check that out. But I will now get our panelists, our esteemed panelists, to introduce themselves. So I am going to, because you're on my screen, you're directly next to me, I'm going to pick Karen. So Karen, if you could introduce yourself first, please.
Thanks, Adrian. So yeah, I am currently a principal business analyst for the UK government. I'm also currently the professional development director at IIBA UK. I'm a passionate advocate for business analysis and change. So I do a lot of talks and write articles, and are quite active on LinkedIn.
Yeah, fantastic. And just to add to that, kudos for volunteering for IIBA UK. Huge amount of work, so thank you for that. So excellent, thank you, Karen. I will go now from Karen to Michelle.
Hello, yes, thank you, Adrian. I'm Michelle Shakesheff, so I'm head of business analysis for Close Brothers, which is a merchant bank based in London. So I've got a big team of super BAs. I've got about 40 BAs there, all in total. So we have lots of fun running a really great community of practice with them. And I've been leading BA teams in a number of organisations for around about 20 years now.
Wow.
I know I don't look old enough,
I
but
know, right? I know. Fantastic. So
so
excellent, thank you, Michelle.
that's me. Thank you.
And last but by no means least, Vadim.
Yes, so I'm Vadim. I work for Colruyt Group in Belgium, which is a large retailer here in the country. Business analyst, or senior solution analyst, as I'm called within the company. I'm a trainer as well. I talk at conferences, so some of the trainings that I give internally, I also adapt to run in conferences. And lately, I've also been branching out heavily into the use of AI,
Yes.
coaching and training that as well.
Yes. I'm sure our conversation will probably branch into AI at some point as we go through as well. So I am going to open up with a question, but as a reminder, if you're tuning in live, do type your questions for the panel in the Q&A tab now that you know their backgrounds, know who they are. But I'm going to start with a really tricky question, which is, what do you think the biggest challenges, or what are the biggest challenges that BAs face today? Who would like that one?
I'll kick off with just a thought, because that's such a big question. It's a case of thinking, gosh, where do I start? It's one of those, don't get me started on this, really. But for me, I think one of the challenges that we have as a profession is that I don't think the role of business analysis is understood. That's one thing. And the other thing is, I think that we're not very good at explaining it. So we struggle ourselves to explain to people what we do. So I can give you a real world example of this. I've got lots of thumbs up, so it's clearly resonating. So the example that I'll give was, I overheard my own mother saying to one of her friends, "Oh yes, my daughter's a business analyst, whatever that is." And I've been doing this for 20 years, and she still has no clue whatsoever. So I think that we actually struggle to define the role ourselves and to explain to people, what it is we actually do. So I think that would be my starter for 10.
Yeah, I definitely recognize that, and it's a really broad role, isn't it? So it is difficult, but it's something we have to individually, collectively have responsibility for coming up with. So, Karen, I see you nodding there. Do you have something to add?
I just noticed somebody said stolen one of my lines, which was if anyone used to watch Friends, the Chandler Bing, what job do you do? And you couldn't ever explain it, is definitely how I see my job. I guess adding to the we can't explain what it is that we do, but we know it's important, is the fact that we still continue to be brought in too late and
Mm,
under the wrong terms.
definitely.
So that's a challenge, isn't it? That's a challenge that we face in terms of how do you then turn the room from we just need system X or
Mhm.
process Y or whatever to having a discussion about the actual problem.
Absolutely, absolutely. There's something in being known before being needed, isn't there? Actually, people knowing what you do and having a positive view of what you do,
Mm,
because I've certainly been in situations where people are like, "Oh, but you're going to slow us down." It's like, no, we're probably going to actually speed you up because we're going to make sure you're delivering the right or the
mm.
best thing type of thing. So excellent,
I'd like to
Vadim.
be a
Sorry.
contrarian, actually,
Oh,
for Michelle's point of view. Actually, because people don't really often don't know what we do, you can make the job whatever you want it to be or whatever the situation needs it to be. On the other hand, what I find most challenging these days is when I encounter a stakeholder and they've done some activities that I would normally do, but they've
yes.
done so by using Claude or Gemini or so on, thinking they've done a bang up job. And then when you go through it, oh, I've made a list of requirements. Okay, well, let's go through them. Well, if there was one not a vague requirement in there, I was happy to find one, but you're still there to clean up the mess
Yeah.
and then do the actual job well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree with that. And I think to in some instances, I think we kind of create our own challenges because I think the BA role is so broad and we have, how many techniques do we have in the book now? 123 we're up to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but if as a business analyst you only use the same two and the only output that your stakeholders see from you is a backlog of user stories, of course they're going to think there's no skill in this and they can just do it themselves. And arguably the user story syntax, it's deceptively simple. So it's,
Yes.
by design, of course it is. Um, so it's a real challenge because BAs are expensive resources and people are thinking, why would I pay £400 a day when actually all they're doing is churning out user stories and I can do that myself.
I, I think that's it, and I think like I've had exactly that conversation before because like anyone who's spent any time with me will know I'm a real fan of problem statements, and problem statements have a similar thing in that they look deceptively simple. The work to get a problem statement that a group of people agree with is really, really hard. And the thing I've sort of, I guess, learned is you have to show them some of the grift. You have to. I'm not saying like you have to make the invisible visible, don't you? To say, look, actually, this is the heart. This is the we're taking the heavy lifting from you, so you don't have to do it. And look, here's this wonderful, beautiful, concise thing at the end of it. So there's definitely something in that
Mm.
too.
And
Um,
sometimes even the language that we use, we don't help ourselves because we talk about gathering requirements, and which
yeah.
makes it sound like they're just lying around and all we we're just wandering around picking them up. When actually to elicit requirements and to resolve conflicts and all of that sort of stuff, there's so much skill that goes into that, and so we kind of tend to downplay that a little bit, I think.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so definitely something about being known before being needed, that reputation, making sure people know what we do, and actually finding the language and the value proposition that we can explain ourselves. So actually, this is a really good segue, Michelle, because your session at the conference talks about building a personal brand, and if I read it correctly, in just 3 words.
In 3 words, absolutely.
Wow, which is
But I'm not,
amazing.
and of course, I'm not going to tell you what those 3 words
Well,
are.
no, of course not. No, that would be spoiling your session. But so why do you think so many talented BAs struggle to get noticed within their organizations?
Well, I think BAs by their nature tend to be quite self-deprecating, and BAs are really giving people. They're really generous, and so they're very happy to help others and make other people look good. Um, so I think when they're in project mode and in BA mode. So, for example, if they're facilitating a workshop, they're great because they're in BA mode. But I think when they leave when they leave the room, they kind of tend to fade into the distance a little bit. So my advice and what I'm going to be talking about at the conference is about saying, actually, how can you kind of keep your BA hat on all the time? Because it's such a transferable skill set that applies to so many other situations. And each of those other situations is a really great opportunity to show other people what you can do. And I think we're kind of missing a trick there because, but with the user stories, it's not quite so bad. But, if you think back to when you used to have, big old BRDs,
Yeah,
additional requirement documents, you might have a couple of days of running really brilliant workshops with your stakeholders and they're all on board. And then you disappear for a fortnight because you were typing it all up. So it's about looking for those opportunities, um, sort of as part of organizational life where you can show what BA skills you have just in
yeah.
day-to-day interactions.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I suspect we've all of us around this table, and many people I'm sure tuned in as well, have had experiences like I can remember a time where I was facilitating a workshop, and for me it was just that's what you do. You facilitate a workshop. We got an outcome that everyone was really happy with, and I remember I was going out the door, and this stakeholder who was quite known as quite a tricky stakeholder said, "Just wanted to let you know I really enjoyed that." Right. And you kind of think, well, actually, because I've used some innovation techniques and the rest of it, I think that's kind of that's always stuck with me. And you kind of think, yeah, actually, every interaction we have is an opportunity to plant the seed with a stakeholder, not just for me as a practitioner, but for us as a profession, which is,
Yes, very much so, very much so. And we have a lot of opportunities to influence our stakeholders before they're even on the project.
mm,
Because there are lots of, organizational life is full of lots of different types of interactions. And my advice really is to keep your BA hat on in all of those other interactions, because then you start to build your brand. And by the time that you get your stakeholder in the workshop, they already know you and they already trust you and they know what you're capable of.
yeah, yeah, different, definitely. On a complete aside, as you were speaking there, Michelle, I was wondering whether sometimes, because I know a lot of BAs, although we're not shy as BAs. I know a lot of BAs would probably describe themselves as introverts. I would, even though people who met me probably wouldn't know that. To the point where this is a complete aside, only because they're in front of me. For the our stand at the conference this year, we've got some hangers that you can put on your door. But my favourite one is the one that's got "Do Not Disturb" on one side and also "Do Not Disturb" on the other side for people who just never ever want to be disturbed. So this would probably be my one. But yeah, I think there's sometimes a bit of introversion in that. I'm not saying it can get in the way, but you have to think, okay, yeah, I need to preserve my energy, but also I need to get out there. I need to be maintaining connections, even if it is effortful to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, and stop gathering requirements and please
Yeah, yeah,
start
yeah,
start eliciting them instead.
absolutely. Karen, Vadim, anything to add?
Well, I was wondering maybe. So, Michelle, I bet that at a coffee machine, you're the type of person who will reply to someone with a question saying, "What do you really mean by that?"
We can't help ourselves, can we?
It's second nature.
It is second nature. But once it's second nature, it's easier.
Yeah,
So that yeah, I just think if you're a BA, you kind of always have to be a BA.
yeah, yeah. Okay, we've got some questions coming in. I just want to pick up on a couple more threads before I go to the audience's questions. The next one's about the strategic voice. So, Karen, I notice in your abstract you argue that the BA role structurally trains us to be invisible. Those words really sort of struck me. Um, can you tell us a bit more about that and how practitioners can break out of that cycle and confidently engage with, more strategic analysis?
Yeah, I was just listening to what Michelle said, and I think some of it relates to what your talk's about as well. Is there's that part of the role which is doing the analysis and gathering the requirements. By the way, I probably wouldn't even mention requirements now. I mean, I'm kind of anti any of that, talking about any of that, because it just sets the wrong impression, I think. But there's that bit that we're diligently doing the analysis, the kind of digging, the asking the questions and whatever. If you're, to a certain extent, if you're doing that well, then you're kind of quite quietly there as well, like you're not seen, again similar to what you were saying. And actually we need to reposition it. What we do is important, but if it's hidden like that, people aren't going to see the importance. They're not going to invite you into the right rooms. They're not going to, they're not going to have you as part of the conversation. So then you've got to think about, like, how do you change that out? How do you still do all that good analysis, still do all the work, but position it and talk about it in a way that's more strategic. So I did a talk a couple of years ago at the same BA conference that we talked about earlier, and talked about providing information on options, so options analysis, and talking about a recommendation. And I got a question in there, and I still get these questions quite a lot, that are we actually allowed to do a recommendation? And I just want to say that every possible time that I can, that we are allowed to do recommendations. That's part of the job, but we're not always trained to look at it like that. We're trained to kind of provide information and allow that to be assessed on its own merit. I don't think that is actually what the job is. I don't think it's ever what the job has been, but for various reasons we might get into later, it's even more important that we don't just see the job on that level. And then I guess there's also being, understanding the strategic context and linking it back to, what you're doing back to what those stakeholders care about and what matters to them and what risks they're trying to face into, and talking about those risks. So again, interesting, you talked about language. I think sometimes, and I kind of I guess might have almost sounded flippant that I said don't talk about requirements, but I do think we talk about things in our language about the way that we do things, and we don't position it in a way that actually our audience will understand. So, the finance director isn't bothered about requirements, they're bothered about their bottom line. So there's thinking about your language as well.
Mm.
It's interesting. A couple of things were springing to mind as you were saying that, Karen. This is, me, I think an analogy, so I'm going to go off on a really weird tangent now, but I don't have a car anymore, but I used to. And I always remember I'd go in to have a service or an MOT or whatever, and they'd say, this needs doing. You've got this option, this option, this option, this option, this option. They'd use all these words that I don't understand. And I'd just be like, yeah, what would you do though? Like, because I've got no idea what you're trying. I mean, obviously you've got to try and pretend you know a bit about what they're talking about so you don't get fleeced. But yeah, actually, of course we should be recommending things. That's, and however, we also need to accept that sometimes there are strategic reasons why those recommendations aren't followed. Which can be hard when you've only worked on a project and they've not followed it. But there can be reasons why that they're not taken. Michelle or Vadim, anything to add to what Karen said there?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Karen, I completely agree with you. But I think very often, related to the point you made earlier, Karen, about BAs being brought on too late, is that once they're on the project manager gives them tasks.
Yes.
Oh, don't get me started. Honestly, it has me in an absolute rage. And I think that, as BAs, we've just got to stand our ground. And actually, this is our domain. You don't tell me what needs to be done. Actually, as BAs, we use our skills to assess what needs to be done, and then tell the project manager how long it's going to take, and then make appropriate use of the project governance. Because as BAs, I think we don't make enough use of the project governance.
Oh, absolutely.
So if we say something is going to take 2 weeks and the project manager tells us we only have one, well, there's a risk.
Absolutely.
And we tend to think that, talking about not being allowed to do things, we tend to think that we're not allowed to use that project governance. And we've got to get better at it to highlight the impact of decisions, particularly when we're told, by project managers or program directors or whoever, oh, actually just do this task and do that task. And I actually have had requests from project managers. Can I have a BA for 8 days? What?
It's so brilliant, isn't it? I
It's,
just every time I go,
it's
okay.
but that's literally what it's like, almost like body shopping, isn't it? It's I want a
Yes.
warm body,
Yeah.
and yeah, it's a tricky place to be. But it's interesting because I mean I agree with all of that, and I think one of the things I've found really useful. It's funny. There's a I call it A- AFPOTA, right? Arbitrary figures pulled out of the air. And like, so one of the questions I like to ask, and I wouldn't use that externally, but it's like if someone, if a, because I've been in situations where they say, okay, we think this will be take about 2 weeks. Okay, can you talk me through how you got there? And they'll go, oh well, just because, and you go, okay, well look, here's I can show you how I've got to my figure.
Yeah.
You show me how you got to yours.
Mhm.
Oh, you can't. Okay. Hmm.
Yeah, exactly. And and I mean, I've had those situations where the project manager is literally sort of, confessed that they took the amount of money they had and divided it by
Yeah,
our day rate, and
yeah,
then
yeah.
figured out they could only afford a PA for 8 days. But that's a really dangerous situation because it's potentially setting somebody up for failure.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And that actually you don't want to put your people into that kind of situation because it's just not feasible.
Well,
Um,
that's it. And if there is a genuine constraint on time, it's like it's either we need to, this is what we need to do, and we'll estimate the amount of time, or this is the amount of time. We'll tell you what we can do, and there's a set of associated risks and or impacts of
Mm.
doing that. So
exactly.
you would think that people in the project and product profession would understand those those trade-offs, but not always. So um, good. So I want to. There are questions coming in. I do just want to ask one more pre-prepared question before I delve open to the audience. Um, and I want to come to co-creating clarity and bring you in, Vadim,
Mhm.
because language is our primary tool. Yet, like often we miss the subtle, traps that stakeholders use. What is one communication trap BA should look out for? Would you say?
The one communication trap that we should look out for is softening our language, in my opinion. In trying to be professional and trying to be courteous and trying to be diplomatic, we often tend to soften our language, and we're not clear in that. To bring it back to one of Michelle's points, where she said, well, we have so much time to do work on a project, yeah, but then there are risks, and then you can be quiet about it. But I've never had any stakeholder fault me for walking into their office and making myself visible, as Karen has said, and saying clearly, I am given this amount of time to deliver on these goals. I don't speak in tasks, I speak in goals. These cannot be achieved fully.
Mm.
And then what I would need is this, and this, or these are the risks, and very specifically in terms of numbers, in terms of words. And the same applies to asking questions. People will often say in whatever meeting that you have, oh, we should have this. Well, what does should mean? Or
Mm,
we need this, it needs to be stable. What do you mean by stable? And so on. So being very conscious about the words that people are using, and then thinking back, well, can I measure this? Can I really put a hard number on this? Because that's the only thing that we can actually agree upon at the end of the day. It's a difficult practice. I've been doing it for years. I'm getting better at it, but I still struggle.
yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, again, everything you've said resonates, and I'm speaking as someone who spent the majority of their life living in the UK, and you know, working with people from different countries and different cultures. I can confidently say we're a really indirect communication culture generally. Like literally, yes can mean no, and oh, interesting point can mean that's of no interest to me whatsoever. It's like we can literally say the opposite to what we actually mean. So there's that element to it, and yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it? One thing I know I have to fight the tendency to do is over explain to people who don't want the detail. sometimes people just want a yes. Does it do this? Yes. Then move on. Or so you have to, whereas mine is, well, I want a caveat with all these other things. Like, no, if it's 99% sure, they just want a yes. And that clarity of communication can be so important. Karen, Michelle, anything to add to what Vadim said there?
No, I think that the kind of softening the language, I think it is a real challenge for BAs, because I think we're so facilitative. I think it must be terribly difficult for many BAs to say no. I'm not doing that. So there's quite a lot of squirming, I think, happens,
Yeah.
when we're sort of put into situations that we shouldn't find ourselves in, or somebody's taking the mickey, because actually BAs are really helpful. And I think sometimes that can be a little bit taken advantage of.
That's interesting. So maybe there's something in as a community as having I don't know if audacity is the right word, but the audacity to just assert ourselves sometimes. And I'm finding myself struggling to even use that language, but it probably is the right language to use. It's yeah, yeah. Anything to
No
add,
is a
Karen? Oh,
oh,
sorry.
sorry. No is a perfectly good answer,
Mm.
but I always give the people the choice. When I say if something is not possible, I say no. Do you need me to list the reasons?
Yeah, yeah,
And then you give them the option.
Same as if I say a recommendation, you'd say like, this is the recommendation and this is what I'm basing that on, or this is what you might want to test to find out that's not true. So you still
mm,
give people that opening, but you're
Yep.
being more direct than, and also to your point, Michelle, of, when you're needing to say no, or you've been given 8 days by the project manager or whatever, use the governance. I'm always saying that, use the governance if that is a struggle. I think that is slightly, I mean, probably Vadim would be disagreeing, so we should be saying it directly. I'm like, if that's the step you need to go in, the direction you need to go in, do that. But don't just sit there and kind of passively take this as a thing to do, and agree with things, and try and fit in. I've seen people so some people will just do their best in those 8 days. Some people will just like absolutely go at it to try and to achieve it in those 8 days. Neither of those neither of those approaches are very good. So
yeah.
yeah, Vadim, I do agree. You need to say, this is me. Maybe put it again. You could put it in a more can-do attitude. Yeah, I can do this, but that's what it's going to look like, and those are the risks, which I think we've said before. Like, there's ways of doing it, but hiding behind either the 8 days or not being able to say something clearly, or however you're kind of responding to that isn't helpful in the long run.
And I think what just sort of springboarding from something you said there, Karen, sometimes the um, almost like options is useful. It's like, okay, well, if you want to do that, then we need one extra BA, and here's the impact of doing that, because there's no physical way of doing it without that. We can do it without, and this is what it looked like. But if you want to do that, here's what it will look like. So your choice. And I think sometimes that's the way to do it, isn't it? It's to surface the implied cost of doing something and saying, yeah, you can do that. Here's what it's actually going to do. Which angle do you want to take? Um, Good. So there's loads going on in the chat. I can't even keep up in the chat. So do keep that going. But I did notice, Karen, that somebody, I think it might have been Catherine, I can't find it now, said that she remembers your presentation from a couple of years ago, and it's still referenced. So that's always a good
Oh,
sign.
thank you.
So,
Thank you,
so I'm going
Catherine.
to bring in questions from the audience now. So Stu asks, who will be our allies or antagonists as we navigate the future of business analysis?
Oh,
Allies or
what a
antagonists?
stinking question, Stu. Wow. Oh my goodness. That's really tough. Karen, what do you think?
Yeah,
So, so I've always had this view, and it comes back to your 8 days again, I think, that, and the asking for a BA that we all cringed at. I just need a BA for 8 days. How did you figure that out? That you really want to talk about outcomes and you really want to have a front of house and you've got all the skill sets behind it, but those people don't need to worry about that. You need to think of it as a group, as outcomes. And if you think about that, what sort of group of people would you want? So you want some good kind of questioning developers. You probably want some user research people because they're quite good. You want some service design, absolutely, if you're in that space. And you want a good project manager. And if you can kind of, it's hard to say you can find those people. Ideally, I mean, again, in the past, I've thought, could you create some sort of agency that provided that as a whole? But that's not how how stakeholders look for things. So, in that respect, I think that's your kind of allies on that level. I guess I'm wondering if that was just part of the question that Stu wanted, but the other part of the question that I think is like, how are you in that senior space, in that C-suite space, who's your ally? And I think that's harder. I don't think there is an obvious person. So what I would do there is try and look for someone who seems to be more responsive to opening up the conversation rather than closing it down, or who understands that we want to talk in outcomes rather than outputs, and perhaps start to align yourself to those people.
Exactly. If I may pick in, Karen, it's not really antagonists or allies in terms of roles or in terms of functions. It's those people around you that have an open mind, that are willing to see the options. Those are your allies. Doesn't matter which part or what their pay grade is. The people who are unwilling to invite other options or even evaluate some other options that we have to bring them, those will be the antagonists, not willingly so, but then we have to give the right example. I'm a firm believer in the be the change you want to be and be the change you want to see. So giving the right example and turning them onto our side.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, one of the things I think looking into the future, which I think it was what Stuart asked, I think there's a real risk actually for our profession, because I think in the future our allies, because we're moving away from projects and moving into Scrum teams or value streams or whatever, agile squads, and I think in the future our allies are going to be the developers and the Scrum masters, particularly the developers, because they know just how good the BAs are. So the developers are going to absolutely love the BAs. The downside of that is that from the business perspective, they're going to look at the BAs and think that we've gone native. So we become part of IT. So we lose that kind of closeness to the business, I think, because inevitably it's going to be that when the developers say that something can't be done, inevitably it's going to be the BA who then has to go back to the business stakeholders to say, actually, sorry, this can't be done because of technical constraints. And in that instance, we just become part of IT. And I think that's a real risk for our profession.
Interesting. Yeah, a lot to think about there. So yeah, Stu, that was a huge question, Stu.
Yeah,
It was about 6 words, and it's such a complex question. So we will move on, and do keep the questions coming in the Q&A tab as and when they occur to you if you're attending live. So Mark asks, as someone that has recruited BAs for a number of years, and now as someone who is in the position of needing to find something new due to restructure, the market is incredibly tough for many. I think there's a real importance to stand out and not relying on templates or AI in terms of applications. The key is in your network. And I'm going to repeat that. The key is in your network, introductions, and being human in your applications. But does the panel have any particular views around this area? So around someone who's perhaps looking, applying, and you do hear of people who are applying to, like hundreds of places before they get a successful position.
Yeah, I mean, I actually presented at last year's BA conference about what hiring managers want to see from your CV. So you're a year late, really. But what I would say in summary is that, absolutely do not use AI on your CV, because you look at your CV in isolation and it looks lovely, but what you don't see is that everybody else's looks exactly the same. And particularly on your personal statement, my kind of challenge to you would be if you can't write about yourself, what what can you write about? So yeah, I mean, actually, Reed did some. I think, or I think Hiscox actually did some research that found that recruiters, so people who review a lot of CVs, can spot instantly that AI has been used on your CV. So I would absolutely say, don't do it. And don't do the kind of LinkedIn easy apply thing. Um, it's quality over quantity.
Mm. Karen or Vadim, anything to add to Mark's question about?
Well, if you talk back to connection is key or networking is key, indeed. Being active online, take the time to write things that interest you, your own particular views, lessons you learned from previous jobs, photos and posts, so that your active people see it and react to others as well. Those
Mm,
build connections. I make at least 1 or 2 new connections on LinkedIn every single day. Not that I really need them, but sometimes people ask me, hey, have you heard about another job opportunity? And oftentimes I've had through to headhunters looking for me. So I pass those along. And knowing people in your network, even if it's on the other side of the world, the web is a great place to do so. And
yeah.
be visible, don't be invisible, like Karen also says.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, Karen, because I know you obviously you've done a lot of recruitment in your career. How would you view? So, my perception would be that if someone had, say, spoken at a conference like the BA Conference Europe, or written an article, or like is showing active participation in a way in the community, would that be something that put them above someone who didn't show those traits, if they were sort of equal on other attributes?
Mm. Yeah, potentially. It shows that you've got an interest, and it shows that you've really thought about and tried to put your voice out there. So yeah, I think that's worth putting on there. I'm gonna have a slightly contentious opinion because
Oh, good.
I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing for you to use AI as part of you creating your CV. I just think that when I get CVs that have just been written and you haven't added your own stamp to it, you haven't tried to provide a link. Because I noticed someone in the chat as well was saying like a lot of places use AI to review the CVs, and I get that. So that obviously then you've got to try and get the keywords, and sometimes you wanted some help at trying to position something in a more strategic way than perhaps, I think BAs are quite bad. I'm particularly bad at saying I've done all these things, but how do I write them in a way that looks strategic and makes me look like I have done the stuff. So there's some people who are doing that who haven't done the work, and there's other people who need help to do that, to position themselves to compete. So I'm all right for you doing that. Add your extra things if you're volunteering, if you're speaking, if you've done things in charities, or because I know BA for Good people
Mm,
volunteer for that, for instance. But be able to connect the things that the book says you do as a BA with actual outcomes, because that's what I don't see. I see a lot of the CVs kind of talking about all the what and not the how. And I try and pick the best ones out of that. I don't use AI to screen them, by the way. We review them all, but I am getting to the point where I can pick out the ones that are heavily AI. And then I still sometimes get, even when I get to the interview stage, people not connecting the outcomes. And
mm.
some of them it will be because they haven't and they've blagged it or whatever, and some of them are because they genuinely don't talk in that way. I don't want you to talk about you're really good at doing a requirements document. I want you to talk about what that did and how that had an impact on something, and what value it brought. Because otherwise I've just got somebody really who's quoting the book, and I can't be sure whether or not you're going to be good at the job or not.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting as you were speaking there, Karen. I was thinking about two pieces of advice that someone much wiser than me once gave me, which is one, say I. Like we tend to say we as BAs don't in an interview. Say I, say what you did. And two is if you get to interview, go through the person spec, look at all the key things, and have an example or story ready for every single one. Because then when they say, "Oh, can you give," because it's often a question, "Can you give me an example of a time when?" You've got them all queued up and you're ready to go. So if that's useful for anyone, they were two good big pieces of advice that someone once gave to me. So I'm going to move on to, so we've got questions still coming in, which is always good. So Rushma asks, the role of a BA is still not recognised in a lot of organisations, which is sad but true sometimes. With this in mind, how will AI impact organisations truly understanding our discipline?
Mm.
And nobody wants that
No.
question.
Well, I mean, I think Rushmore, it's a really great question, and I think we probably all are kind of mulling over it because if we can't get better at explaining what we do and demonstrating the value that we offer to the organisation, why why does the organisation need us? But as I say, if we've got I'm just make it clear. My team don't do this, but I'm sure in some organisations there are business analysts who use a really restricted range of techniques, and all they do is I mean we've heard the phrase user story monkey, because all they're doing is just churning out user stories. If as a business analyst that's all you're doing, you're going to make yourself obsolete because AI can churn out user stories until the cows come home. So to a certain extent, I think that it's pretty much within our gift, I think, and I think that's quite scary.
Yeah, yeah, we need to step up. We need to, and there is a certain element. I mean, this is sometimes a controversial thing to say, but it's very aligned to what you said there, Michelle. But like, if we can't show the value, do we deserve a place at the table?
Yeah.
And I, I think there's a strong element of that, really, isn't there? So,
Yeah,
It's
I
Karen,
funny
mean,
you,
that
yeah,
this
so
sorry, go
question
ahead.
will come.
just to carry on with, we're business analysts. We're really excited and all in, we can talk until the cows come home about the analysis side. Actually, we can't forget the business.
Mhm. It's 50% of the job title
Exactly.
at the end of the business. Sorry, Vadim, I think you were going to
Yeah, well,
interject.
it's funny that this question comes up because we might be looking at our role as a business analyst, but I've heard the same from a project manager. I've heard the same from a developer, from a
Interesting.
tester. I've heard the same even from someone who works at purchasing within our company who says, well, am I going to become obsolete because people can, oh, I negotiate contracts, but people can look up negotiation skills with AI and they think they can do my job and so on. And the same goes for everyone. So everyone is in an existential crisis for the moment, thinking that there are tools that people can use to mimic our job, but it's still mimicking. It's still up to us to show the value. And if I walk into a room, I ask, how can I make your future better?
Mhm.
How can I help you? And just by asking that question, and I know it sounds like what ChatGPT would ask them as well, how can I help you today? But I'm asking, how can I make your future better? And that really makes an impact. Then you have a foot in the door. And then it's up to you to prove it by delivering, by keeping connecting, by keeping a clear sense of the goals. And at that point, you don't need to prove yourself anymore. People will start to trust you because people still trust people.
Mhm.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. I think another thing that springs to mind. Some of you may be aware I facilitate an AI BA forum quarterly, and one of the things that keeps coming up is, yeah, people can create prototypes in AI quickly, but productionizing them,
Mm.
like making them rigorous enough in the integration, the cybersecurity, that's a whole different question. Getting something that is actually enterprise production ready that you can safely put in front of particularly an external consumer is a separate thing. So I think there's that element as well. So excellent, thank you, Rishma. Good, good. Really, really thought-provoking as always. I am going to jump to John's question next. John asks, if delivery teams can increasingly use AI themselves to analyze information, draft requirements, map processes, or create user stories, where does the distinct value of the BA sit in that environment? So I think John's saying there's like a separate, distinct role. I'm interested in answers beyond the usual emphasis on human judgment, particularly where much of the analysis may not actually require significant judgment in the first place. And then there might be situations where things are less contentious, maybe. Karen, you look like you've got an answer to
It's
that.
somewhat in my talk. Um, so if you're, and this resonates to the answer to the last question as well. If you're just doing the scribe bit, if you're turning up and taking those 8 days that Michelle said, and filling it with, oh, they think you think you want a new solution. I'm just going to write down all the things that you want and then play it back to you. And great, we all know what we're doing now, and we can go and build it. If you're doing that job, then that is definitely gonna go, right. You might have been able to hide behind that before. You're not going to be able to hide behind that anymore. Now, to John's point about I'm interested in answers further than human judgment, but I think it is all about human judgment, because it's making an assumption that information. So I see that AI or someone bringing that AI as another contributor in the room. Now, we know that when we sit in those rooms, with a lot of what we're doing is trying to manage all of those different viewpoints and manage all that different and get some consensus and keep that consensus consistently through the project. Because our job is never, well, I've never seen the job as you write the requirements and you walk away. Incidentally, the first BA, when I wasn't a BA, the first BA I worked with, that's how she saw the job. And I straight away saw that can't work, because you're there to answer things, but you're also there to keep things on the straight and narrow, keep it to the business case, or if new things come in, reevaluate where it is in relation to the business case. And AI currently can't do that. AI is actually creating more stuff that we have to evaluate. So actually, if you see that part of the job as being the BA part of the job, then we've got more to do through that AI work. Vadim mentioned it earlier. People come with things, they come with answers, they come with requirements, whatever. We don't know if that is right. And even if it is right, what does right mean? Right is a different concept to everybody in that room. So right for finance isn't going to be the same as right for credit management, isn't going to be the same as right for marketing. So that's, for me, that part of the job is still there. Even if the AI's come up with a really good answer, we've still got to balance that up in a enterprise, complex environment.
Mm.
And I think as well, I think AI, I think, is really good at doing a high volume with, low variation. So AI can do the same task over and over and over again, and ad infinitum, without getting tired or bored or becoming snowblind. So that's what AI is really good at, and that's what people are really bad at. But what people are really good at is the stuff that AI can't do, and that's reading the expression, just that smallest wrinkle that appeared on a stakeholder's forehead when you said something that makes you stop and go, oh, there's something there. Let's explore that. And I think what people are really poor at is reviewing what somebody else has done. So I think the worst kind of possible situation you can get to really as a BA is where you don't elicit the requirements. AI is used to produce a backlog of user stories, and it's your job then to sit and look through them and review them, because that's just soul destroying work, and that's the kind of work that people are really bad at.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so I'm picking up a lot of threads that connect here, because it's like actually we've got to communicate our value in a way that people don't think that's a viable model. I remember this is probably a year or two ago. I was speaking to someone who was a foreign language translator, who was saying that increasingly the kind of she was freelance, the kind of gigs she was getting asked to do was, well, look, we put it through AI. We just want you to check it and correct it. And she was saying that's just dull. Like that's not what you that's not why you become a foreign language translator. So like as BAs, I suppose we've got to protect against that, really understand the value, create those connections and build on those connections and be known before we're needed. So I'm going to move. There's a couple of final questions I have. If we haven't answered your question live, I apologise. There are always too many questions. So Fiona, Caroline, and others, I can see a whole bunch of questions. Apologies for that. I have put the panelists' LinkedIn URLs in the chat, so you can connect with everyone there as well to continue the conversation. So I'd like to invite you all, firstly, to give a final thought, like of everything we've talked about, what's your key takeaway? And I am going to start with Michelle this time.
Oh gosh, thanks,
I'll put
Adrian.
you on the spot.
I think probably get your elbows out. Actually, we're really skilled professionals. So don't be pushed around. We it drives me absolutely mad that when the senior stakeholders are thanking, that following the successful project implementation, they always thank the project manager for delivering the project. And I always think that, but the project manager is the only person who hasn't actually delivered anything. All they've done is write down what everybody else has done. So I think it kind of like fight your corner a little bit more, and don't forget to use that project governance. Don't be pushed around.
Yeah, don't be pushed around. Use your elbows. I love it. So, Vadim, what would your takeaway be?
A takeaway that I've said in many trainings before, that's your role is to bridge the gap. You're there to show as a business analyst perspective taking and empathy in someone else's role. So if you're in a room with technical people, you're there to represent the business and their viewpoint, gather the information from the technical side. When you're meeting with your stakeholders, you're there to also represent what is technically feasible or realistic, but also think about the customer. What does the customer who spend their money for your service, for your product, what are they thinking? Perspective taking, building that bridge, being the gap, that's our role. And I don't believe that any piece of technology is ever going to replace that. And a BA doing this will have value and will have a role.
Fantastic. I see lots of like virtual hand claps to that, Vadim. So that's definitely resonated. Karen, what would your key takeaway be?
That the future of the BA role is bright, but only if you're looking at it as a role that considers outcomes, that a role that supports strategic decision making. If you're still holding on to the fact, for whatever reason, maybe you're scared, maybe you're using it as a jumping off point, whatever, but if you're still holding on to the fact that this job is writing requirements down, scribing, taking notes and putting them in a document that no one reads, then yeah, that job isn't there anymore.
Yeah, times moved on. Times have moved on. So fantastic. Well, so my final question to all of you, because I mentioned at the very beginning that you're all speaking at the BA Conference Europe in just a few weeks in London. So it'll be really nice to see you all in the same physical location. So without giving too much away, what's something that people will get from attending your session? So Karen, what will people get from attending your session?
So as always, because like you, Adrian, I like an analogy. So my talk starts with two stories. One about my kitchen, always about my kitchen. One about the golf course, and at the end of those, I get labelled as being a difficult person in my performance review. So if you're the sort of person who gets frustrated by the fact that maybe you're trying to do some of the things we've been talking about in this session and you get that kind of label or that resonates with you, then in my session I'm going to tell you why I think that happens and 6 things that I think about. I'm not perfect at them, but I think that help to be more strategic and the type of BA we've talked about, helping to, for instance, letting go of being perfect. So as BAs, we quite often see the answer in our analysis. We're like, we've got to go for that answer. We shoot for the stars, and then the environment isn't ready for that. So how do you deal with that? And I end with thinking about not what we're doing this for, but who we're doing this for.
Fantastic. That sounds amazing. Thanks, Karen. Vadim, what will people get from attending your session?
Well, sessions actually, because I got
Oh, sessions, plural, of course. It's a
suckered into
workshop.
doing two of them. One on the Monday is going to help you stand firmer on your 2 feet. That's based on Stoicism. And for those of you joining on the Wednesday in the workshops, that's going to be being firmer in how you speak and how you ask questions. That's about as succinct as I can give it.
Fantastic. And last but by no means least, Michelle.
Thank you. So hopefully, if you come along to my session, you will understand the quiet power of small repeated actions. And don't forget that I'm telling you how you can build your brand. I'm only using 3 words, so you're going to remember it. And so I'm going to give you those 3 words, which you will be able to put into practice immediately.
Fantastic.
They're very actionable.
Fantastic. Well, so if you are still on the line, do stay on the line. There's a few closing messages I want to give you. But before I do that, I want to just give a massive thank you to our speakers, Michelle, or our panelists, Michelle, Vadim, and Karen, for taking time out to have this conversation. A definite virtual round of applause for your contributions. And I'm sure I have put in the link several times, or in the chat several times now, linked to the Business Analysis Conference Europe. Please do have a look at that. And do connect with the speakers on LinkedIn as well, because it's always I always think after a session like this, it's a good virtual round of applause to get connection requests and these sorts of things. So if you've enjoyed it, do let them know. So a few other announcements. Firstly, the next session will be a session called "Every Requirement is a Negotiation." So moving beyond the idea of requirements, and that's with Christelle Govender, who's spoken once before, or I think once or twice before on a webinar, and she was absolutely fantastic. And that is coming up in October, because September is a bit of a rest month when it comes to webinars because of the BA Conference Europe, which takes up a lot of mental energy. Also, just a couple of other sort of messages for anyone that might be interested. Firstly, our literally brand new course, which is offered to teams of BAs. So if you have a team of BAs, is kind of, and this is literally hot off the press, is around, it's too much light, internal BA consultancy shaping demand, which actually covers some of the topics that we've been talking about here, like getting known before being needed, and really thinking about the value proposition. If you have a team of BAs and that's of interest, please do drop me a line. And then final thing to mention, and if you've ever met me or spoken to me before, you're going to know what I'm going to say now, which is the completely free quarterly magazine, BA Digest. If you haven't heard of this, if you don't know what it is, please go and look it up. Literally, you don't even have to sign up. Just go to badigest.link. All of the back catalogues are there. And if you have a story to tell, it is an open submission process. You just put the title that you're proposing to write and a few bullet points, and that will get into our submission system, and we'll give you feedback there as well. So excellent. All that's left for me to say now is, again, massive thank you to our panelists, our speakers. I'm looking forward to seeing you in London in just a few weeks' time. And thank you for everyone who's tuned in live or indeed watching the recording. So until next time, enjoy the rest of the week, and see you all soon. So take care. Bye for now.
Bye.